Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. To everyone joining us here at Sydney Town Hall, I hope you enjoyed your meal. Welcome to those tuning in online. It's now my pleasure to introduce the 2024 Lowy lecturer, the President of the Czech Republic, Petr Pavel. The President is one of Europe's most influential and interesting leaders. He's been a vocal supporter of Ukraine in its war against Russia. He has led the calls for a strong and united response by Western nations to Russia's aggression. Mr. Pavel is the fourth President of the Czech Republic. Prior to entering politics, he spent 35 years in the Czech military. While working with UN peacekeeping forces in the former Yugoslavia, he led an operation to evacuate 53 French soldiers from a combat zone, for which he was awarded the Légion d'honneur and the Czech Medal for heroism. So I think the Lowy lecture will be a walk in the park, Mr. President. He later became the commander of the Czech Special Forces before being appointed Chief of the General Staff of the Czech Armed Forces. Mr. Pavel also chaired the Military Committee, NATO's senior military authority, from 2015 to 2018. In March last year, he was inaugurated as the President of the Czech Republic and took up residence at Prague Castle. Mr. Pavel's extracurricular activities are just as interesting as his CV. He loves riding fast motorbikes. In fact, when he travelled to Germany last year, he didn't have motorcycle outriders, he was on a motorbike himself. And a few weeks after he was inaugurated, a picture went viral of the President climbing a mountain with a keg of beer strapped to his back. Mr. President, bravo. This is the perfect photo to appeal to an Australian audience. Stephen mentioned earlier that as a boy in Filakovo, Frank Lowy admired Presidents Masaryk and Beneš. The 1989 Velvet Revolution had a powerful impact on me as a young man. I very much admired Václav Havel and his fellow revolutionaries. I was lucky enough to meet President Havel when he visited Australia in 1995, and a few years after that, when I was a graduate student at Oxford, I visited Prague Castle and visited President Havel's office. So it is a particular honour for me to host Václav Havel's successor. Ladies and gentlemen, let me now invite President Pavel to deliver the 2024 Lowy Lecture.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to have been invited to deliver the annual Lowy Lecture. And I'm really privileged to be among all those big names mentioned in the beginning of this evening. The world is increasingly becoming a more dangerous and unpredictable place. This sentence has become most probably a common opening line in many speeches these days. Sadly, it is not just a rhetorical cliché, but a stark reflection of the complex challenges we face. We are living in an era where diverse crises overlap, conflicts intensify, and new threats emerge. An era where old assumptions give way to new and uncomfortable realities, creating unprecedented levels of uncertainty. This complex situation demands more from us than mere acknowledgement. It calls for urgent, coordinated action and a commitment to enhanced resilience across all domains. Recognizing and understanding these challenges is the first necessary step. Addressing them together is probably the greatest responsibility of our time. The world is witnessing a record number of armed conflicts at varying levels of intensity, the highest number since World War II. Following the brutal terrorist attack of 7th October last year, violence in the Middle East continues to escalate, with a two-state solution seeming increasingly out of reach. Diplomatic efforts have stalled so far, leaving the region in a precarious state as civilians continue to bear the brunt of the violence. Africa is grappling with numerous conflicts that have caused instability in many regions. In Sahel, insurgent groups and ethnic violence have destabilized several countries. In Sudan, fighting between rival military factions has forced millions to flee, leading to one of the greatest humanitarian crises. In eastern DRC, armed groups continue to fight over resources, worsening regional instability. Asia is also home to a number of ongoing ethnic and territorial disputes. Myanmar remains embroiled in conflict following the military coup. The humanitarian and human rights situation in Afghanistan is beyond dire, especially for women and girls. Sadly, the list goes on. In Europe, war has made a devastating return. The Russian aggression against Ukraine is no more cruel or senseless than any other conflict. However, it does stand apart in certain ways. The war holds profound global implications, with the potential to reshape the international order that has governed the world since the end of the World War II. A few days ago, we marked the somber milestone of 1,000 days of this aggression. 1,000 days of entire cities reduced to rubble, homes shattered, and lives forever altered. The humanitarian impact of this war is enormous. Almost 4 million people remain internally displaced within Ukraine. Over 6 million have sought refuge abroad, primarily in European countries. This influx has presented significant challenge for us and other European countries, including the need for housing, healthcare, education, and employment opportunities for those affected. I feel proud about my own country that has stood up to the challenge to date. Czechia hosts the highest per capita ratio of Ukrainian refugees in the European Union. Ukrainians now constitute about 3.5% of our entire population. So far, we have been successful not only in welcoming, but also in integrating Ukrainian refugees. By streamlining legal processes, we have ensured rapid access to healthcare, education, and the labor market. As a result, 70% of economically active Ukrainians have successfully found employment across various sectors. I also want to use this opportunity to express my most sincere appreciation to Australia for your support to Ukraine. Your contributions, including the provision of military equipment, humanitarian aid, and financial assistance, have been truly invaluable. Nevertheless, this war is not about us, nor it is just about Ukraine's borders or Europe's security. It is about principles that affect us all: sovereignty, territorial integrity, freedom, and the right to determine our own future. While the Ukrainian people are paying the ultimate price for these values, the stakes extend far beyond them or us. This war impacts every one of us. The instability in Europe has clear implications for the Indo-Pacific. If violations of sovereignty and international norms in Europe face only limited consequences, actors such as China or North Korea can be further encouraged to adopt more assertive or aggressive policies. And let's be sure that they are watching closely and learning fast. This would pose an even greater threat to regional and global stability. The Russian war of aggression has already intensified inflation worldwide, driven by spikes in energy and food prices. It has disrupted supply chains already strained by the preceding COVID pandemics. The disruption of grain exports has worsened global food security for many countries in Africa, Middle East, and Asia. Yet, serious as they are, these effects are not the most consequential outcome of Russia's war. The most profound impact of the conflict in Ukraine is the strengthened cooperation among Russia, Iran, North Korea, and China. This represents a dramatic geopolitical shift in the global balance of power with far-reaching implications. Russia has turned to Iran for drones and to North Korea for artillery, ballistic missiles, and once unimaginable for manpower to be deployed on European soil. North Korean soldiers gaining military training and combat experience will become an even greater threat to the entire Korean peninsula and the region. With Russia facing economic sanctions, China has become its major supplier of dual-use goods. The autocratic regimes cooperate in cyberspace and share surveillance technologies. They support each other's narratives, aiming to undermine public trust and democratic values globally. They back each other in international fora, including the United Nations, advancing their own agendas and opposing initiatives condemning their rogue actions and human rights violations. This emerging bloc is not a formalized coalition. Instead, it is closely knit by opportunity, temporarily shared goals, and mutual interests. Driven by the ambition to consolidate domestic power and undermine the rules-based international system. This bloc has the potential and the ambition to reshape global politics, trade and security, redirecting power, values, principles and influence away from democratic countries for years to come. This dynamics poses significant security risks to the whole democratic world and those countries striving for democracy. It contributes to rising military tensions and a number of cyber attacks in the Asia-Pacific, while undermining the institutions that both Australia and Czechia depend on. It seeks to exploit divisions within societies, further eroding democratic resilience and unity, a challenge that Czechia and other European countries have experienced firsthand. Autocratic states often engage in thorough disinformation campaigns to sway public opinion or even influence electoral outcomes. And some within the targeted countries contribute, whether knowingly or unknowingly. The threat of autocracies is not only external, it also comes from within our societies. As the world becomes more dynamic, more complex, and more daunting, people increasingly seek simple answers and straightforward-looking solutions. As a result, populism-driven political forces are gaining momentum worldwide. To deliver on their promises or simply to consolidate their power, they do not hesitate to interfere with free media, civil society, or independent judiciary. To quote already mentioned the first Czech president, Václav Havel, "The natural disadvantage of democracy is that it ties the hands of those who wish it well and opens up unlimited possibilities for those who do not take it seriously." Does this mean that democracies are in decline, as we often hear from some autocrats? Or are the autocracies, as called by the same autocrats sovereign democracies, will eventually prevail? Or is it all lost? Certainly not. But we must respond and adapt to this new situation. And we have to adapt fast. And if we respond together in a well-coordinated way, we will be all stronger for the task. Some positive changes are already happening. The war in Ukraine has strengthened NATO's partnerships, led to increased defense spending, and prompted countries like Finland and Sweden to join the alliance, something nobody would have thought just 3 years ago. Cooperation between NATO and the Indo-Pacific 4 countries, such as Australia, has become much stronger with unprecedented levels of engagement at both ministerial and head of state and government level. European countries have accelerated efforts to reduce dependency on Russian energy, leading to increased investments in renewable and nuclear power. They are also seeking alternative, reliable suppliers, improving gas infrastructure, including the development of LNG terminals. The Russian aggression has reinforced unity, particularly within NATO and the EU. Though it is not enough. The challenges are global, and our response must be global too. And there is a glorious historical precedent. Together, we stood strong during World War I. Europe remains deeply grateful for the sacrifice of your soldiers at Gallipoli, at the fields of Flanders, and also later on in the same fields during the World War II. And all of these joint experiences made a strong point in European history, weakening autocracies and shaping the path towards democracies. This kind of profound alliances and a sense of mutual solidarity is why I traveled all the way to Australia, and later on I will continue to New Zealand. I am standing here in front of you to emphasize that in today's world, distance no longer matters. Ever closer cooperation among democracies is essential for building and strengthening our resilience. We are fortunate to live in societies founded on rules, mutual respect, and tolerance. It is our duty to preserve these values as they are essential for the well-being of our citizens and the cohesion of our communities. Fostering critical thinking and promoting media literacy are crucial to strengthen our resilience and empower individuals against disinformation. By working together, we can pool resources, share expertise, and tackle challenges that no single nation can effectively address on its own. As Professor Joseph Nye once said, we are condemned to cooperate, because if we don't, we are really just condemned. Ladies and gentlemen, I came to your beautiful country to identify opportunities and strengthen our cooperation in many areas, including research, cybersecurity, energy, or defense. Czechia is a medium-sized country, but we are committed to being a reliable and trustworthy partner, backing words with concrete actions. I deeply care about peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific. Your security is closely linked to our security. To address these shared challenges, the only way is to strengthen our bonds. I am therefore hopeful that both the EU and Australia will return to the negotiating table to finalize the free trade agreement and advance scientific cooperation under Horizon Europe. Diversifying our trade and intensifying our cooperation in research will make us less vulnerable and less dependent on unpredictable actors. The future is in our hands, and it is up to us to seize the opportunity to create a better world, not just for ourselves, but most importantly, for future generations. Thank you for your attention.
Well, Mr. President, thank you for delivering a lecture that I thought was very clear and one that will be closely read in capitals in Asia and Europe, and thank you for taking my questions. I want to ask a few questions about yourself, if I can. I mentioned Václav Havel and the impact he had on me. You were in your 20s at the time of the Velvet Revolution. What were your impressions of Havel? What were your impressions of that period, and what does it feel like to occupy the office that he once held?
Well, it's difficult to answer the question about a man who is considered to be a symbol. He was a symbol of what was called a Velvet Revolution, a man who was broadly respected in the world for his views on democracy, human rights, civil society, the topics that were hard to understand in 1989 or in early 90s, because very few people in former Czechoslovakia and later Czech and Slovak republics actually knew what democracy was about. Most of us were born in the system under communist rule. We were educated and raised in an environment that was the only one that we knew. There was no comparison. So when he was talking about democracy and civil society, many people were thinking about Western goods, nice cars, great pace and a good holiday, simply having better lives. So we had to learn a lot of things to come up to what he was saying these years. And of course, being in the same office today, I wouldn't have a smallest ambition to fit his shoes. And even though our names sound very similar, we are very different people. He was absolutely the right person for the time, because he was a man of values, and after changing the system, the transition period needed to be strongly values-based. Only then the time came for, let's say, more pragmatic leaders who were mostly focused on economic transition, and that was another story. I am obviously trying to inspire myself when it comes to values of Václav Havel, but as I said, I would never try to be the same.
You had a very different path to the presidency from Havel, obviously. It's unusual in Western countries for very senior military commanders to run for politics. Why did you decide to run for president?
Well, with the exception of the United States and France, of course. I mean, Eisenhower and de Gaulle.
You've got big shoes to follow in Eisenhower and de Gaulle, I might say. Yeah.
But there were some examples before. It's not so common, that's true, but I finished my military career in 2018, and I ran for the office in 2022, so there was a break of 4 years, in which I tried to be useful in different ways, because I didn't want to go to private business or any political party. So I decided to pass my experience, my knowledge from international arena, especially to young people. So I did hundreds of debates in different schools. And that eventually led me to explaining young people how necessary it is for them to be engaged, how they should follow what is going on around, how they should be active as citizens and responsible, and they should go to elections, and if they see the chance that they could do something for society, even run for an office. Mm-hmm. And one of the students once asked me when I'm going to take my responsibility and to run for the office. And in that time, we were about 2 years from the elections, and the situation was that the biggest chances for becoming a president had one of the leaders of our populist parties, and I decided simply to do my best to prevent that scenario, and so I'm here.
All right, and you've been president for, I guess, 18 months or so. Is it more fun to be a military commander or a president?
Well, as a military commander, you give the orders, and usually these orders are executed.
All right, I think we know the answer to that question. All right, let me get onto some tougher topics. Let's talk about the Ukraine war. You mentioned it a lot in your lecture. You were the first foreign head of state to travel to eastern Ukraine after the invasion began. In recent months, things have started to look much bleaker for Ukraine. So tell us what will happen in the next months, do you think?
Well, it's difficult to say. Let me start with explaining why the Czech Republic was so closely behind Ukraine. Not only we were condemning very strongly Russian aggression from the beginning, from the annexation of Crimea, but we had quite a strong Ukrainian minority already before the war, about 140,000 people. And we had our own experience from 1968 with Soviet-led invasion. So it was quite clear that we would be on the side of Ukraine. Not only from the reason of, let's say, proximity, mental proximity to Ukraine, but also because of principles, because we realized that it's not just about part of Ukrainian territory, it's about how and in what world we would live. In a world which President Putin describes as a game of the big boys, where big countries divide the world in spheres of influence, and then they balance the power among themselves. Or if we live in a world where even smaller countries have their voice, where they are protected by the system. And that's why we think it's a matter of principle to support the Ukraine. Otherwise, we would compromise our own foundations. Mm. So I went to Ukraine to be very clear that we stand with Ukraine. We were supporting them from the very beginning with military equipment, including heavy equipment, combat helicopters, ammunition. We took up the initiative to get ammunition from a number of countries around the world to keep Ukrainians fighting successfully and defending against Russia. What will be the next development? It's difficult to predict, but what is clear that our support to Ukraine was quite slow at the beginning. It allowed Russia to consolidate, to make a transition from peace economy to war economy. It allowed Russia to also consolidate their manpower, to learn from their mistakes at the initial phases of war. And at this point, they have the initiative. They are advancing in a slow pace with lots of casualties, but advancing. Casualties actually never mattered in Russia. So they don't care because they take a lot of soldiers, not only from North Korea, but also from Central Asian countries, just for a promise of Russian citizenship. So manpower is not an issue, but it is a great issue. I would say the greatest issue for Ukraine. They are at the limit. We can provide them with as much equipment as we want, but I'm afraid that we don't want to really give them more today. But if they lose, then of course the whole security in Europe will be extremely difficult. So my advice and call on my colleagues in Europe is always let's do them anything they maintain status quo, because I'm not that optimistic that they could turn the tide and push out Russian forces at this point. It would cost them enormous number of casualties without any prospect of success. At the same time, we should also create a lot of pressure on Russia through mainly China, India, countries that are siding Russia, and of course also using the weight and the opportunity which poses the election of Donald Trump. Whatever we think about it, he may be a turning point in this war. But of course, we should do our best to be part of discussion, because there might be a temptation of Donald Trump to make a quick deal with President Putin. That would be quite beneficial for Russia, potentially even for the United States, and that could be very dangerous for Ukraine and for Europe.
All right, I'm going to come to Mr. Trump, don't worry. One more question about Ukraine. Last week we saw the Americans finally authorize the use of ATACMS, and Putin escalated with this intermediate range ballistic missile. Are the ATACMS too little too late? And what message is Putin sending with this missile? Who's he sending that message to?
I would say mainly to Ukraine and his own population, because he knows that we know how many of these missiles Russia has, and we also know how extremely expensive these assets are. We also know that Russia has a doctrine escalating to de-escalate. So this might be exactly the step to escalate to threaten everyone against using more precise weapons against Russia, because obviously the fear from the Third World War is present not only in Europe but in all other countries. But it's exactly that fear that Russia is using from the very beginning. Because if you remember, when the aggression started in February 22, President Putin was very clear in saying that any country that would assist Ukraine in any way will be a legitimate target for Russian weapons. And obviously that was the first red line he set in this war. Since then, we saw a number of red lines. They were all crossed through provision of armor, then long-range artillery, then missiles, then even aircraft, and still nothing happens. I believe that we should probably be more assertive, reminding President Putin that it's Russia who started the aggression. It's Russia who is firing into deep Ukrainian territory, not only by their own, but by foreign weapons. And it's entirely up to Russia to end the war. It's just one order of Vladimir Putin. So what we are doing is, in my view, and not only in my view, perfectly legal and in accordance with international law. So let's be tougher, not escalating, but let's be very clear that we are on a legal side, and that it's Russia who now needs to withdraw.
All right, let me ask you a question about Russia, and let me admit, first of all, that in 2022 I was blacklisted by the Kremlin for criticising Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The bad news for
Congratulations.
me... Thank you. Well, thank you. I did take it as a signal honour, but the bad news for me was that I was only number 33 on the list of Australians who were blacklisted. And I hope that having hosted President Zelensky and now you, I'm going to be promoted up the list. But can I ask you, what happens if Russia is seen to win this war? How does that affect Putin's calculations? Will that embolden him further?
I'm almost sure that it will, because Russia from several centuries only understand the language of power. Russian Tsars were saying that Russian territory is undefendable. It can only be defended through expansion. So Russia was always trying to create a buffer zone through occupation or through liberation and humanitarian assistance and international assistance, as they called it. Russia is openly talking about renewing a zone of influence. Clearly, they want to restore the greatness of the Soviet Union, including former satellites. That's their perception of security. When they talk about security guarantees for Russia, they mean exactly that. So hoping that Russia will stop at western Ukrainian borders is quite naive. Because most probably the next in the line would be Moldova, with a very low population and with some presence of Russian forces in Transnistria, Georgia, and potentially other countries. Russia will simply behave as imperial power, as they always did. So I believe that part of our approach to Russia should be not only to negotiate just peace in Ukraine, but take it as a subset of much broader debate about European security and about security guarantees in Europe from the North Sea to Black Sea, and also discussing renewal of all treaties that expired, because a number of treaties on conventional weapons, on nuclear weapons, on proliferation, open skies, they all are history and should be renewed to really have a safe environment in Europe again.
All right, I promised you I'd come to President-elect Trump. You, of course, had some personal experience with Donald Trump when he was president and you were the chairman of the NATO Military Committee. What were your impressions of him then?
Well, he behaved, and he always behaved like a businessman. It's a transactional behavior. When he came first to NATO, it was as if he would come to a company. He said, who doesn't pay will not be protected. He never realized how NATO is working. But at the same time, it was not just negating what he said. It was the message was right, but the way how he presented it was shocking to many. Some are praising Trump that he actually pushed European allies and Canada to spend more. That's probably true, but it was more war in Ukraine than Donald Trump. But actually, the effect was right. But even today, he continues the same narrative. But I was arguing against his criticism of, for example, Norway for spending 1.5%. But with Norwegian product, what they spent, 1.5%, was much more than some countries spending 3%. So Norway has one of the most modern, well-equipped militaries, well-trained in NATO. But at the same time, they got a very critical letter from Donald Trump to pay much more. Otherwise, they wouldn't be protected by the US. They have a long-standing agreement with the US military, especially Marine Corps. They have all prepositions stocks in Norway, special bilateral agreements. So obviously, that would be nonsense not to protect such an ally. Similar situation was with other countries. There were, on the other side, countries that were above 2% line. That means, let's say, friends of Donald Trump, who were not contributing at all to common activities because they spent most of their defense spending on their own needs or to pretend defense against another ally. Talking about Greece and Turkey. And then, of course, was a very mixed view on how NATO should be working, because we should work much more with real capabilities, not the percentage of spending. Now, most of the countries have done a lot to increase defense spending, also to meet capability targets, to be truly valued allies. But one more thing I would like to remind is that Donald Trump sees NATO as sometimes a difficult tool. They want, on one hand, European allies to pay more, but rather to spend the extra money on American equipment. So he wants European and NATO allies to become more independent, but at the same time more dependent on US military production. So I think we will have to really talk seriously about keeping the balance, because I believe it's absolutely justified to have Europe militarily capable, politically self-confident, to be a true partner to the United States. And then wherever the problem is, where the United States would be engaged elsewhere, for example, Asia, Europe should be able to defend itself even without American presence. And that is our biggest task. This is how I see true partnership and North Atlantic bond, transatlantic bond, because otherwise it will always be a dependent child and a very unhappy father.
You're right that Mr. Trump is transactional, and he likes to win on both sides of the transaction, as you said. We saw a bit of the transactionalism today, where he threatened that on day one there'd be 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada because of all the bad people that have flooded, all those Canadians massing on America's northern border, prepared to invade. I'm actually married to a Canadian. I can tell you they're actually quite nice people. But let me ask you, what does this kind of behaviour mean for the international economy? And what will be your strategy for dealing with this kind of behaviour when Mr. Trump assumes office?
Well, I think everyone knows that it won't be so easy to convince Donald Trump on changing his course and narratives. But at the same time, I believe that in all our debates, we will have to be very open in pointing where is actually our rival or enemy. It's not across the Atlantic. Obviously, it's quite normal that there is some economic competition, but at the same point, we will have to stop and say, when we go on in competing with each other, we will actually get weaker against our true rival in East Asia. And if we don't want to let China to prevail economically, financially, but even militarily, then we really have to work much more together. And not just within EU or NATO, but within all democracies around the world. We will have to consult much more and potentially create at least some foundations for common policy vis-à-vis China, so that we truly create one solid counterweight to their interests, because only then we will be respected. If China manages to divide us, she would be able to push their own interests, because we will not be strong enough to face the pressure.
All right, we've got a few more minutes and I'm going to try to squeeze a number of questions in. Let me ask you about China, seeing as you've just mentioned China. Russia wouldn't be able to maintain its fight in Ukraine without China's support, the supply of dual-use goods and other benefits. It's odd in a way that China is doing this, because Chinese interlocutors always talk about the importance of state sovereignty and territorial integrity, and yet they are facilitating the prolongation of this unjust and illegal war. Is it acceptable for a country like China with aspirations to lead to play this role?
Short answer would be no, but more difficult is to convince China to take another approach. I think we should remind China at any opportunity that being a global actor is not only about the benefits, but it's about a huge responsibility. I tried to call on China during a last UN Security Council session in September in New York, but I believe that the voice from Central Europe is probably not strong enough, and we should put our voices together to call on China to be a responsible global actor. China wants to be seen globally as a friendly country that wants to make business, wants to have good relationship with everyone. So let's be it. Let's show it in a concrete action. And one concrete action would be to push on Russia to stop the war, because that would also fit to Chinese interests, because all these trade channels that are being now threatened by the war will be reopened in full. So I think we should also remind China that it's not only a matter of responsibility, but it's also useful for their own economy.
In your remarks, you mentioned the ongoing conflicts in the Middle East. Czechia has always been a strong supporter of Israel. You paid a state visit to the country in January, where you called on the Israeli President Isaac Herzog, and you said you can always rely on the Czech Republic. Czechia is one of just a handful of countries to have voted against recent UN resolutions relating to the conflict alongside the United States. Why does the Czech Republic take this stance?
Well, first, our support to Israel is long-lasting. From the very origins where Czechoslovakia was one of the countries at the rise of Israel as an independent state. When Israel got into trouble quite soon after the origin, we sent the aircraft and we trained their pilots to defend themselves against Arab countries. So the bond is quite strong and long-lasting, but we cannot now say that we support Israel in all what the government is doing. We support Israel, we support Israeli people, but we have difficulties with some decisions of Benjamin Netanyahu's government. When I had the opportunity to talk to him in February this year, I told him that we are all concerned about the development in Gaza and eventually in the West Bank. We would like to see what is the plan after the military operation. What are the measures to protect civilian population, to allow humanitarian assistance to get into Gaza? And of course, the longer the war goes, the more difficult it is to support Israel, actually to support the government. And it is difficult to distinguish because whenever you say that we are behind Israel, you are immediately put under pressure for, in fact, approving genocide in Gaza. We are definitely concerned about protection of civilians, as we were concerned with protection of civilians in Israel on the 7th of October, We are concerned the same way in protecting civilians, being it in Gaza, being it in Lebanon and elsewhere. But it doesn't mean that we would condemn Israel and allow either sanctions or prosecution or whatever other measure that would compromise the existence of Israel.
All right, two final questions. You've been around the international scene for a long time as a senior military leader and then as a president. We discussed earlier your admiration for Havel. Are there one or two other individuals you've encountered who've really impressed you?
Well, I would say in this big politics, it's really difficult to talk about true friendships because we are at the first place protecting the interests of our own countries. So wherever the interest of any country meets with the interest of my country, then we are in a friendly relationship. So I would probably be cautious to call any politician to be my friend. I want to be in a great relation with all our allies, with all our partners. But of course, whenever we have a difference in our interest, I would be very, very open and keeping distance. But there are some people not from the political arena who were extremely inspiring. And one of them was a man whom I met in my previous military career. He was a political prisoner. In fact, he was born in what we call the First Republic before the Second World War. His father was well respected in resistance against German occupation. He became a cadet in military academy. He was part of the resistance as well. And then in 1948, after the communist coup, he was convinced of a coup against a country and sentenced for 15 years. He served a majority of that sentence, 12 years, in a uranium mine, which was probably the worst place he wanted to be. And after 1989, he was rehabilitated, and he started building new security services. And I was lucky to be his close assistant for 2 years. He was a man from whom I learned probably the most in my life. In times when we were trying to get closer to NATO, almost everyone, when we spoke to our American allies or British allies, was very, I would say, weak in position. Agreeing to anything, able to do anything. This guy was always pretending the view that he thought was right. And we had a meeting with an American chief of intel, and my boss disagreed strongly with him. So they sent both delegations out of the room and had a meeting about half an hour. And after that half an hour, they came out and were the closest possible friends, admiring each other. So what I learned from that was that if you are sure that your arguments are right, and you shouldn't be afraid even of an American general or president.
All right, final question, just on a lighter note. I mentioned the photo that went viral of you a few months ago. So the question I've really been wanting to ask you this whole time is, why did you hike up a mountain with a keg of beer attached to your back?
Well, it's we have a very similar sense of humor with Australians and Brits, and this is a kind of a Czech humor that whenever we do something, we also have to have fun. So it was a kind of action for the public to raise not only awareness about hiking being very healthy, but also it was about getting people together and having fun in the mountains. So the task was to take a keg and bring it to the top of 1,300 meters high peak, and then to have a good time with all of those companions.
All right, well, politicians in Australia will be taking note. Mr. President, thank you for your Lowy lecture today. Thank you for taking my questions. We appreciate your candour. I certainly agree with you that it's vital that there's a quickening of connections between democracies such as Australia and the Czech Republic. And I think all of us have been impressed this evening by your sense of calm and clarity and strength and wisdom. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking President Pavel. Ladies and gentlemen, enjoy your dessert, and shortly I'll come back.